Good evening. My name is Kelly Hodge, and I proudly serve on the board of the Women's Law Project. Welcome to our Mass Ball. It is my pleasure to be with you all this evening. As a native of the Philadelphia area and a product of an all-girls school not far just outside the city, there's a special sense of pride to celebrate the work, advocacy, and mission of the Women's Law Project with you all tonight. I joined the board of the Women's Law Project just a couple of years ago, but was introduced to it a number of years ago by a friend, colleague, and former high school classmate of mine who would invite me to events. She is also a former board member of the Women's Law Project, and Kathy would take me to events and I would marvel at the wonderful atmosphere and things that I would learn and hear about how the project was always pushing for the voices of women to be heard in every sector of our communities. When I was invited to join the board, it was my pleasure to say yes. What I find so unique and powerful about the Women's Law Project is how committed they remain to staying in the forefront of women issues and rights. Before we get started, I wanted to take a moment to thank more than 60 sponsors. Without their generous support, this event would not be possible. And as you may know, this event helps sustain the vital work of the Women's Law Project and what it does every day for women, LGBTQ people across Pennsylvania and beyond. So thank you for fueling the fight for gender justice. In particular, I want to thank our lead sponsors, our underwriters, Fager, Drinker, Biddle, and Reith, and Troutman Pepper, our benefactors, Fox Rothschild, our partners, Archer, Greenberg Traurig, Klein Inspector, and Wendy Wolf, and our sustainers, Mark and Linda Bernstein, BMC Benefit Services, Dwayne Morris, Independence Foundation, Sarah Ricks and Tom Dolgenis, Susan Sorensen and Richard Burke, and Willick, Williams, and Davidson. I wish you all a wonderful evening, and I look forward to mingling with you all at the Masquerade Ball, happy hour after the program. Enjoy, everyone, and thanks for being with us tonight.
Good evening, and welcome to a very unusual version of our annual party, the Mask Ball. More about that later. I'm the proud director of the Women's Law Project. For anyone who is new to the party, or if we are new to you, welcome. In this year of searching for silver linings, one silver lining is that hosting a virtual party allows us to meet new friends in the struggle for equality and justice. And, of course, to say hello to our longtime friends and supporters. The Women's Law Project is a unique organization. We work on a broad range of interrelated issues, such as protecting and advancing reproductive rights, LGBTQ rights, workplace equality, economic security, justice for survivors of sexual assault, and safety for victims of interpersonal violence. In short, we work to eradicate sex and gender-based discrimination in our institutions and in our culture. So suffice it to say, it's been quite a year, or I should say 4 years. Given our mission and the state of our country, the ancient proverb, "May you live in interesting times," comes to mind. It may sound like a blessing, but it is indeed a curse. We are living through historic times, times that have brought so much suffering. Though tonight is a celebration, I must first acknowledge that we have surely all been affected by pain and loss by this horrible virus and the gruesome mishandling of it. There's widespread unemployment and economic despair. In the pandemic recession, women have lost jobs at a higher rate than men for the first time since 1964. Women, disproportionately Black and brown, are overrepresented in the occupations that have suffered the most job losses, care work and the service sector. We used to use the phrase about the sandwich generation to describe how many women without support were pinned between caretaking for children and for elders, while also working outside the home. The pandemic, school closures have made this predicament worse. I saw a headline that summed the situation up in one horrific line. Other countries have social safety nets. The United States has women. James Baldwin wrote, "It is certain that ignorance, allied with power, is the most ferocious enemy justice can have." We grieve and rage at the brutality experienced by Black and brown people in America, who were simultaneously disproportionately affected by the pandemic due to the legacies of institutional racism and being assaulted and killed in the streets by law enforcement. Today is also Trans Day of Remembrance, honoring the more than 57 trans individuals who have been killed this year. So there's no use in pretending. We are also looking at a dark winter. I find relief in working toward a better future, in seeing how many other people, like you, are also working towards a better future. And I find joy in being able to be here together tonight, even virtually. So why a mask ball? Well, masquerade masks are usually associated with celebration, and thankfully we do have a few things to celebrate. The most obvious, the man with the bad temper and tiny hands, whose idea of greatness meant nothing more than reversing progress towards equality, will be leaving the White House. And it is downright poetic that a person who symbolizes the very people he has tried so hard to oppress and disempower will be our next vice president. We celebrate Kamala Harris, the first woman, the first Black woman, the first South Asian woman who will hold the second highest office in the United States. We also celebrate our work. Like most of our public interest colleagues, we packed up our laptops and went home in March and went straight to work on emerging issues related to the pandemic. Working with allies, we successfully advocated for public health emergency leave in Philadelphia. And as our courts closed down, we helped organize new protocols throughout Pennsylvania so that people in danger could still access vital court services, such as protection from abuse orders. We're the first legal organization, I believe, to challenge the constitutionality of Pennsylvania's discriminatory ban on Medicaid coverage of abortion care from a dining room table, having delivered the oral argument remotely before Pennsylvania's Commonwealth Court. We continue to assist pregnant people facing discrimination, work that is more urgent than ever as they are asked to return to work and in potentially risking exposure to COVID. We continue to represent clients at judicial bypass hearings, crucial, compassionate work that is also so much more challenging in the time of COVID. We celebrated victory this year when the Lock Haven University student athletes we represented successfully won more opportunities for girls on sports teams. And of course, we continue our unique and groundbreaking police accountability work as we reviews case files to hold police accountable for investigating sex crimes appropriately. A lot of litigation has been necessary to respond to attacks on our rights. We filed or joined briefs in important lawsuits that may have significant impact on the people we serve. Soon there will be even more lawsuits, even more policies, even more public education necessary to undo some of the damage inflicted on our rights over the last 4 years. Some obvious and some more hidden from public view. For example, there's a bill coming up in the Pennsylvania legislature that could permanently alter the structure of our state Supreme Court and represents one of the biggest threats to equality in the Commonwealth we have ever seen. You will be hearing much more about that from us and our allies very shortly. Meanwhile, everyday work continues. The daily endeavor of developing and advocating for good policies, fighting bad ones, and of course, representing abortion providers in day-to-day regulatory matters, keeping the doors open to serve patients in need of abortion care. We know, of course, that keeping the doors open is just the starting point, not the end point for reproductive justice. Rights mean very little without access, and access to an abortion means little without access to healthy pregnancies. Gender justice means little without racial justice. And all of that leads me to introduce our next speaker. For decades, our work on reproductive rights and justice has been informed and inspired by the scholarship and activism of Professor Dorothy Roberts. We were thrilled when she came to Philadelphia and joined the faculty at the University of Pennsylvania Law School. So it's now my pleasure to introduce her to you as she talks about her work.
Thanks so much, Carol. I'm truly honored and excited by the chance to celebrate the wonderful Women's Law Project with you tonight. I'm so grateful for all of your work for women, girls, and LGBTQ people in Pennsylvania and across the country. In the late 1980s, I began to notice news stories about the prosecutions of women for using drugs while pregnant. Prosecutors across the country had concocted an assortment of charges to punish them for fetal crimes, child neglect, distribution of drugs to a minor through the umbilical cord, assault with a deadly weapon, and attempted murder. And I wondered, how did a public health problem become a crime to be solved by locking up women instead of providing them with better health care? I was sure of three things about these prosecutions: that they primarily targeted Black women, they punished these women for having babies, and they were a form of both race and gender oppression. As I investigated the prosecutions, I began to link them to a long history of regulation of Black women's bodies and to see this history as crucial to gender and racial politics in America. My book, Killing the Black Body, was the product of my mission to explain how the legacy of punishing Black motherhood was vital to the very meaning of reproductive freedom. It also became the foundation for my work with a burgeoning network of women of color activists to build a movement for reproductive justice that put Black women's organizing at the forefront. Now, more than 20 years have passed since Killing the Black Body was published, and all the devaluing ideologies, laws, and policies I wrote about not only persist, but in some ways have expanded in new guises to inflict even more injury on even more women and their families and communities. But there's hope. The exciting rise of reproductive justice activism has provided a new framework and potential for resistance. And over just this past summer, there were uprisings around the world demanding abolition and defunding, not just reform of police. Although the protests were triggered by the killing of George Floyd by Minneapolis police, they called for abolishing the racist, sexist, homophobic, ableist, and classist structures that dominate our unequal and inhumane society. That combination of frustration and hope marks our time, doesn't it? I'm not sure if I should be out partying that Trump was defeated and a woman of color will be our next vice president, or angry and worried that so many Americans voted for him despite his racist, sexist, and autocratic words and actions. So first, let me say a little bit about what we're up against. The legal apparatus crafted 2 decades ago to criminalize pregnant Black women set the stage for a new and more widespread surge of fetal harm prosecutions. Women across the country have been arrested for risking fetal health, not only by using drugs while pregnant, but also by falling down stairs, attempting suicide, driving while drunk, botching self-induced abortions, and having miscarriages and stillbirths. Prosecutors have used to have to invent novel interpretations of existing child abuse, homicide, and drug laws to persuade courts to apply them to fetuses. But since then, state legislators have enacted fetal protection laws that directly criminalize pregnant women by giving fetuses the same legal status as an already born child. As states have expanded prosecutions for fetal crimes, they've simultaneously escalated their assault on women's access to abortion. Conservative justices on the Supreme Court have indicated their opposition to Roe v. Wade, raising the specter of overruling the decision altogether. The appointments of Justices Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, and most recently Amy Coney Barrett dramatically increase the chances that the court will eliminate Roe's constitutional protection of the fundamental right to end a pregnancy, allowing state legislatures to make all abortions illegal. But at the same time, even with Roe still standing, in the last decade, state legislatures nationwide have passed hundreds and hundreds of laws deliberately designed to place insurmountable obstacles to people seeking abortion services and to drive clinics out of business, effectively outlawing abortion while Roe remains in place and denying reproductive justice and healthcare to millions of people. Only after the Texas TRAP statute threatened to shut down almost all clinics in the state did the U.S. Supreme Court in Whole Women's Health find an unconstitutional burden on women's rights. Then Louisiana passed legislation mimicking virtually word for word the Texas statute. And the Supreme Court finally and fortunately struck down the Louisiana law just this past summer in June Medical Services versus Russo in a 5-4 decision. It was the court's first test of abortion rights since the appointments of Gorsuch and Kavanaugh, who voted to uphold the abortion restrictions. Chief Justice Roberts cast the deciding vote to concur with Justices Breyer, Ginsburg, Sotomayor, and Kagan. But the narrow decision in June Medical Services won't deter states from enforcing current onerous laws and passing new ones. And the controversial Hyde Amendment, banning federal funding of abortions except in very limited circumstances, has survived for 2 more decades. And unfortunately, the Affordable Care Act missed the opportunity to make abortion and other reproductive health services universally accessible. We have to change that. In February 2011, for Black History Month, anti-abortion organizations erected a giant billboard in New York City's Soho neighborhood. The billboard displayed the image of a 6-year-old African-American girl beneath the words, "The most dangerous place for an African-American is in the womb." It was part of a right-wing anti-abortion campaign that placed more than 100 similar billboards targeting Black women across the nation. The abortion as Black genocide argument distorted that movement's history and in fact promoted its racist ideology. And I mean the racist ideology of eugenics. The billboard statement declaring Black women's wombs unsafe recalled eugenicist rhetoric. It didn't oppose it at all, advocating sterilization of women deemed unfit to bear children. What else could it mean that Black women's wombs are dangerous? The anti-abortion rhetoric diverted attention from the structural causes of racial disparities in abortion rates and demonized Black women by blaming us for genocide against our own communities and by suggesting we're incapable of making our own reproductive decisions. So this unified right-wing strategy of turning pregnant women into criminals while shutting down access to reproductive health services is now crystal clear. Women are arrested both for stillbirths and attempted abortions under the same laws that were honed at the expense of Black women. Pregnancy itself is being criminalized. Recent years have also uncovered more evidence of past sterilization abuse of Black women, Native women, and women of color, and its continuing presence in state programs and institutions. The ideology of population control that the government can and should keep certain women from procreating is deeply embedded in US policy. An investigative report published in July 2013 disclosed a program of unapproved and coerced sterilizations of women incarcerated in California state prisons. And the doctor in charge had the nerve to boast that he was saving California taxpayers' money by keeping women from I want to quote him, compared to what you would save in welfare, paying for these unwanted pregnancies as they procreated more. And he meant unwanted by him and people in power, not by their mothers. And in September, just this past September, a nurse, Dawn Wooten, filed a whistleblower complaint that a doctor had been giving detainees in a California detention center hysterectomies without their full understanding or consent. In addition, the prison and foster care systems are also marked by glaring race, gender, and class disparities. Poor and low-income Black mothers are disproportionately involved in both systems. Thousands of Black women in prison today, mostly for nonviolent offenses, need treatment for substance abuse, support for their children, or safety from abusive relationships, not criminal punishment. Locking up astronomical numbers of Black mothers is a powerful way of restricting reproductive liberty and transferring political inequality to the next generation. Prisons also cruelly devalue incarcerated mothers by shackling pregnant inmates during childbirth. In the vast majority of states, inmates' newborns are automatically placed in foster care immediately after delivery. And federal law governing child welfare practice encourages the termination of incarcerated mothers' parental rights. And local policies don't do much to keep these mothers in contact with their children or to support their families after they're released from prison. I concluded Killing the Black Body by proposing, quote, a radical vision of reproductive justice. And I called on theorists and activists to explore how social justice could be made central to their conception of rights, of harms, and of the value of procreation. At the time I wrote those words, a movement led by women of color, reproductive health activists was forming, a movement grounded in a long legacy of women of color organizing for reproductive freedom, health equity, and racial justice. The reproductive justice framework includes not only the human right not to have a child, but also the right to have children and to raise them with dignity in safe, healthy, and supportive environments. It positions reproductive rights in a political context of intersecting race, gender, and class oppressions, and recognizes our activism has to be linked to social justice organizing in order to gain the power, resources, and structural changes needed for improving the well-being of all women and girls. Reproductive justice provides a concrete basis for building radical coalitions between reproductive rights activists and organizations fighting for racial, economic, environmental justice for immigrant, queer, and disabled people, and for systemic change in law enforcement, healthcare, and education. True reproductive freedom requires a living wage, universal healthcare, and the abolition of prisons. Black women see the police slaughter of unarmed people in our communities as a reproductive justice issue. Black anti-carceral feminists are also developing ways of stopping violence against women without relying on violent state law enforcement. At their core, reproductive justice and Black Lives Matter both insist that US society must begin to value Black people's humanity. The growth of the reproductive justice movement has coincided with the growth of the prison abolition movement. As I mentioned earlier, this past summer, protests erupted around the nation and the world in response to continued police violence against Black people. The call to defund police and abolish prisons began to make sense to more and more people. Abolition means not only dismantling these inhumane and punitive systems, but also imagining and building a more humane and democratic society that no longer relies on policing and caging people to meet human needs and solve social problems. People are even beginning to see that the family policing system is the same. Like the police and prison systems, family policing is designed to maintain racial injustice by punishing the most marginalized people in place of meeting human needs. It targets Black, Native, and Brown mothers in particular, and relies on racist beliefs about family dysfunction to justify its terror. It's entangled with police, criminal courts, and prisons, forming an arm of the carceral state, and it's structured to harm children and their families. So instead of providing the safety net that Carol mentioned, this system punishes mothers who are struggling to care for their children in a profoundly unequal society. I think we're at a momentous point in history with the convergence of these movements. So rather than feel dejected by the lack of real change since I've been working in this field, I'm actually more hopeful than ever. We're seeing connections between the reproductive justice, trans justice, environmental justice, disability justice, abolition, and other movements for transformative change. And at the forefront are the people who've been impacted the most by these systems and who know best what needs to change. Together, we can dismantle these dehumanizing structures and build a society guided by a commitment to race and gender justice. And I'm thrilled to celebrate the great work of the Women's Law Project in this struggle. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Tara Murtha, and I have the great pleasure of working at the Women's Law Project as the Communications Director for the last 6 years. I want to thank Professor Roberts for your powerful words, your lifetime of work, and your hope, and for being here tonight and sharing your insight with us. Now I have the pleasure of introducing you to another powerhouse, Jill Morrison. Jill was a Philadelphia Bar Foundation Fellow at the Women's Law Project for her very first job after graduating law school. After her time with us, Jill pursued a fellowship with Georgetown University's Women's Law and Public Policy Fellowship Program in DC. After 12 years at the National Women's Law Center, she became director of the fellowship program. During that time, Jill had the incredible formative opportunity to talk with and learn from the late Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who regularly invited fellows for tea and conversation about life and the law. So Jill, thank you for being here tonight, and take it away.
I am honored to have the opportunity to say a few words about Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. It was truly one of the greatest joys of my job over the past 8 years to see young attorneys interacting with Justice Ginsburg. Half of my fellows are from the United States, so they were acutely aware that the justice's work and the work of so many of her contemporaries made their lives possible. The other half of my fellows come from African countries, including some that still have discrimination against women enshrined in the law. The justice was especially inspiring to and inspired by them, because their fights were almost identical to those she undertook here in the 1970s. My primary job was just to keep the fellows calm enough to ask a question. I advised that if they wanted to see a smile, they should steer the conversation towards her legendary marriage to her #1 fan, Marty. I also warned them not to be surprised if RBG wanted to know something about them. Occasionally, she followed one of the fellows' questions with, "But what do you think?" She was incredibly generous with her time. We always scheduled our tea towards the end of the term, hoping that the bulk of her work would be done. Occasionally, this did not happen, and an anxious law clerk would come to gently remind her of what was still on her desk. When she left, there was always a collective exhale, and the fellows took the time to just sit for a moment and take it all in. Eventually, a stern-looking U.S. Marshal would arrive to break our spell and politely kick us out of the room. Of course, the hour or two that we spent with the justice left an indelible impression on all of us. But it was also clear to me that the justice got something out of the interaction also. Our time presented an opportunity for them to thank her, but also for the fellows to accept the responsibility of finishing the job she started. Justice Ginsburg knew that the movement for gender equality would be carried forward by these brilliant and committed individuals. I am confident that she knew her legacy was in good hands. We are all a part of that legacy. My fellows, countless advocates across the nation and the world, and organizations like the Women's Law Project. Thank you so much for the work you do. And now, please enjoy the powerful voice and art of Philadelphia artist Val Gay.
We who believe in freedom cannot rest. No. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes, until the killing of black men, black mothers' sons, is as important as the killing of white men, white mothers' sons. The older I get, the better I know that the secret of my going on is when the reins are in the hands of the young who dare to run against the storm. Not needing to clutch for power, not needing the light to just shine on me. I need to be just one in a number as we stand against tyranny. Struggling myself don't mean a whole lot. I've come to realize that teaching others to stand up and fight is the only way my struggle survives. It survives. Oh, it survives. I'm a woman who speaks in a voice, and I must be heard. At times I can be quite difficult, but I will bow down to no man's word. No man's word. We who believe in freedom cannot rest. I said we who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. We who believe in freedom.
People united will never be divided. The people united will never be divided.
Thank you, Val. I know that you're out there. It's always such a pleasure to hear your voice. And I can't wait to be able to hear it again and feel it in the same room with you when all of this is over. Okay, just a few more minutes and we'll be heading over to the Masked Ball Happy Hour on Zoom. You don't have to go looking for your email, though the link is in your e-registration email, because we're going to drop it in the chat, so you should be able to just click on over, make it easy. Before we go, though, you're going to hear from my colleague, Amal Bass. She's going to share with you opportunities she sees for us to all engage deeper in this work, because if it wasn't clear already, we need to work hard, we need to work smart, and we need to work together. And then Carol Tracy will have a brief final word. But first, just a few short videos from great fellow advocates and friends of the Women's Law Project that we are so proud and happy to know.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Lisa Pereira, and I am a proud abortion provider and member of the Women's Law Project Board. It is impossible to adequately express my gratitude for the work that the Women's Law Project does to support reproductive rights for people capable of pregnancy and the providers that care for them every day. I know that I can reach out to Sue Fritchie or Christine Castro, two staff attorneys, anytime I have legal questions about the complicated web of abortion restrictions in Pennsylvania that I have to navigate every day to care for patients. I know they have my back if a protester is threatening my safety or the safety of my patients. And most importantly, I know that the Women's Law Project is committed to making sure access to abortion care is equitable. Currently, they are challenging the Hyde Amendment here in Pennsylvania, which limits abortion coverage for people with government-based health insurance. These are just a few examples of the amazing things being done to support reproductive rights by the Women's Law Project. I implore you to donate liberally so that this amazing work can continue. I thank you so much for your time and generosity and wish you a happy and healthy 2021. Thanks.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Raven Dorsey. I am a former intern and staff member of the Women's Law Project, and I'm really excited to be here with you all tonight. The Women's Law Project has a really special place in my heart. When I came to the Law Project as a student, I was just fascinated with the work, with all the different things that the Law Project did and different ways that they contribute to increasing gender and racial equity in the state and honestly throughout the country. Now I realize even more so that real social change takes us all working together in real different ways, using our gifts and our skills to contribute in our own unique way. And the Law Project is so special because it focuses specifically on protecting the legal rights and expanding the legal rights of women and girls. And racial and social and gender equity would be impossible without their work. I'm so grateful to have been a part of the Women's Law Project team, to have been able to help fundraise for this very special and important and unique cause and organization. They really are the best, y'all. And I'm so grateful that all of you are here to support them and to make sure that this work continues, especially as the legal terrain out there begins to look crazier and crazier. It's great to know that there is such an experienced, strong, powerful, mighty organization like the Women's Law Project out there fighting for all of us and protecting and expanding our legal rights. Thank you so much and have a great and fun evening. Take care.
Gender justice means a world where equity and equality are the norm, full stop, for every single person. It means we have equitable pay, that we have justice for gender-based violence, that we have reproductive freedom. And I know the Women's Law Project is fighting for these things and so many more every single day so that women and girls all across America can have a better and brighter future.
Hello, I'm Amal Bass, the Director of Policy and Advocacy at the Women's Law Project, where I've been on the staff for 14 years. I hope you're enjoying the evening so far. Before we close and head over to the happy hour, I want to talk with you about some of our policy efforts. Without raising your voice and urging our representatives to take action, whether urging them to vote against a dangerous bill or urging them to vote for a good one, our work can only go so far. I'm going to start with a grim fact. The federal courts are increasingly unresponsive to the needs of the people we serve, and the government, as we know, is severely divided. While these conditions are, let's just say, less than ideal as we work to serve the needs of women, LGBTQ people, and families of Pennsylvania, we must remember that our states are laboratories of democracy, as Justice Brandeis wrote in 1932, and that our cities and municipalities are laboratories within our states. This is exactly the type of situation where our power as a state-based organization with 46 years of local knowledge and relationships gives us an advantage. It is our local governments that have been the most willing to develop solutions to challenging problems. That is certainly true in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, where we've been engaged in public policy advocacy for decades. Over the last few years, Philadelphia has enacted protections for workers who suffer discrimination due to pregnancy. Philadelphia has provided paid sick leave and has prohibited employers from relying on a worker's wage history when setting future wages, a provision designed to eliminate the pay gap that undervalues the work of women and of people of color. And recently, as Carol mentioned earlier, Philadelphia adopted paid emergency leave for workers unable to work due to COVID-19 related reasons. In Pittsburgh, a paid sick days ordinance finally went into effect this year after a trip to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, in which WLP lawyers in Pittsburgh filed an amicus brief. With this decision, the court recognized Pittsburgh's fundamental authority to protect the health, safety, and welfare of its people, an idea that was disputed by forces that attempted to block these life-saving protections. Our goal is to make policies like these the law throughout the Commonwealth. Here's the good news and where you come in. There are many opportunities at the state level for you to advocate to strengthen reproductive autonomy, safety, and economic security. Bills have been proposed that would expand access to contraception, address maternal mortality and systemic racism in healthcare, limit the use of restraints on pregnant, incarcerated, and detained individuals, protect pregnant workers from discrimination, provide paid family leave, close loopholes in our state equal pay law, protect LGBTQ workers from discrimination, and raise the minimum wage. There are so many opportunities, both to support good bills and to fight bad ones. And you may need some help to choose a few to prioritize. And if that's the case, don't hesitate to get in touch with us. Go to our website, sign up for action alerts, follow us on social media, and drop us a line. We look forward to working with you toward equality and gender justice right here in Pennsylvania, one of the all-important laboratories of democracy. It is an honor to do this work with my colleagues at the Women's Law Project, and we thank you for your support.
And we thank you for joining us tonight. It's been wonderful to connect with you, even in this remote manner. So before we move to our happy hour, I do really want to thank all of you for the kinds of support you have given us over the years, including your financial support. And indeed, we're thrilled to say that we've exceeded our goal tonight for this event. And knowing how many pressures are on so many people, I really want to thank you so much for that support. I particularly want to thank members of our host committee, including those who you heard from tonight, Kelly Hodge and Lisa Pereira, Raven Dorsey, and Tori Conter have helped us immensely putting all of these pieces together. We also want to thank Galas at Home, who provided the technical support for us. And the biggest thanks goes to our Associate Director of Development, Brittany Green. Brittany, you did a fabulous job putting all of this together. We hope many of you will join us now and don your masks. Of course, you don't have to wear a mask if you want to join the happy hour. We just thought the mask ball would be a relief from the COVID masks as we sit in the safety of our homes. But whether you join us or not, whether you wear a mask or not, we just want to thank you, and we ask you to stay safe in the coming year. Thanks again.